Hi, João. Lovely to see you. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to have an interview today with João from the Wines of Alentejo Sustainability Programme. WASP is a founding partner of Sustainability and Drinks, and we are delighted that João's here today. We're going to talk about the importance of sustainability certifications, and we're going to cover that off through their impact on climate resilience, gaining knowledge through data, and also having a little bit of a conversation about how we engage growers and how we can really drive change through that. But first of all, João, thank you for joining us.
Thank
And
you.
could you just introduce us briefly to WASP? How did it begin? What are its key strengths and objectives? Give us a little overview of the programme.
Well, in a nutshell, we basically didn't want to reinvent the wheel. So 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we there was this train that had left the station, particularly led by California, Chile, Australia, New Zealand, and we decided to, still try to get on that train, not maybe the first wagon, but maybe the last wagon. And so basically through benchmark, to a lot of visits, a lot of communication, a lot of really good relationships with people around some of these programs, particularly Chile and California, because they were the most climatically similar regions to Alentejo. So, drought-prone zones, not much rain, hot, bold red wines. And so indeed, very similar characteristics, already projects on the field. And so basically we went in and we copied what we needed. We added what we needed to do. We created our own scheme. We had a partnership with the university, a group of producers. They're already working on these subjects. And based on that, we launched in 2015 a program. It's a free of charge and voluntary program that it's managed by the organization that controls the DOC of the Alentejo region. And so indeed, through, the identification of a couple of champions. So we had a couple of companies that already were doing a really interesting work. And through the identification of these champions and by using these champions as a benchmark tool, as a flag of what we could achieve and what was already being done. So for this, we needed a lot of transparency, and we also need a lot of generosity, because these producers had to be generous enough to share with us, costs, investments, return on investments, not the secret on how to make wine, but the secret on how to change your mindset. And so that was extremely useful in order to give this feeling to the observer. So to all of these producers who are starting their own trip, this idea of, okay, they're telling me all of this stuff. That's interesting. Okay, this might actually be true. This might actually work. Why don't I try? And so based on this kind of catalyzing strategy, it became, fortunately today, 10 years later, an extremely successful project in Europe. In Portugal, is leading. And I would say that also it's very, very recruited all around. And it's pretty much based on this. So on the fact that through time we've been managed to engage more and more the producers, most of it through comparison, through sharing, knowledge sharing, creation of networks of knowledge sharing. And then obviously with time we understood that also maybe the cherry on top. So I always see this in two different levels. So the level of operations, where you create your own efficiencies, where you save costs, or you save resources, you save raw materials, you protect your environment, you protect your people, you protect your community. But then on the other hand is the consumer. And how can this be reflected with the consumer? And that's where third-party certifications then can come and play a role. So indeed, 5 years after the launch of the project, we created this third-party certification. And again, it's a very strong certification, with lots of levels of review and review and review and review. And so indeed, based on all of this, we now have a very strong tool to help the producers to, on one hand, boost their resilience system, on one hand, to help them to be more prepared in the context of climate change, but at the same time prepared in the context of competitive advantage with a consumer or markets that are far more, conscious and demanding with regards to these issues of sustainable development.
That's amazing. Thank you. So effectively, your objective is twofold. You've got the grower resilience on one side through the collaboration, and then equally you're using it for a consumer market communication tool. Um, in terms of data, you talked a little bit about the layer upon layer upon layer. Actually, how much data do you gather? How onerous is it for the growers? But also, I think what I'd love to hear a bit more about is how you then turn that into action. How do you learn from the data that you're gathering and move things forward?
Well, that's a very complex issue because I have a team of three people and more than 700 members representing 13,000 hectares of vineyard in Alentejo, right? So again, layers. There's lots of different layers. So one layer is our basic layer, which is what do we request them to have? What's the kind of information they need to produce? And this information can be as various as a simple soil analysis or a simple water analysis to how many hectares of cover crop have they, or square meters of cover crop have they planted in the last 5 years, or how many water lines have they recovered in the same amount of time, or how many people, what's the gender ratio in their organization, or what's the money paid on this gender ratio in this organization, or issues related with the weight of the bottle, or issues related with how much has been saved in terms of dematerialization. For instance, if you stop using colors in your, in your secondary packaging, or if you stop using kind of, I'm lacking the word, materials that you can take out of your glossings. If you can take glossings and all of that kind of materials from your packaging. So this is all data and weather data. So lots of our producers have weather stations, others have, humidity scans for the soil. So all of this data needs to exist, point one. And they need to produce it in order for them own continuous improvement strategies. That's one level. So then there's the level of the third party auditor that comes in and observes if that information in fact exists and if it's in fact applied in some way through time by the producers. So that's another level of complexity. Then there's the third level, which is, do the producers use it? Because often they don't have time to use the plethora of information that they can actually produce. So they acknowledge there's all of this information. They acknowledge that it's important on the operations and mostly in the communication aspects of the efforts of the operations. But then can they use it? Do they have the tools, be those AI, be those people, to process that information and convert it in actionable on one hand and perceivable on the other hand, right? And then there's a fourth layer, which is what do I do? What does my team do with that data? We don't do anything because there's enough time to process that data. If I was by default, if I was to look at a process of my 700 members per day, 2 years would not be enough to process the data of all of these people, assuming all of these people have that data, of course.
Have you
Go for
ever
it.
seen? Have you seen any kind of peaks in data or anything though that has surprised you and led you down to start a different project or to help kind of change a process because you're seeing a trend maybe in specific data?
Well, what we see is more than the data in itself is what generates the data. So, for instance, issues related with regenerative agriculture. So, what we see is a trend. There's clearly a trend moving on in a certain direction, and what you see is producers of all sizes and capacities going in that direction. Okay, not all, obviously, but you know, interesting ones, champions, say. And so what we understand through that is, okay, so if there's a move in this direction, maybe we can go and see with regards to, for instance, financing of research projects where we can aggregate two or three of these guys plus one guy that's actually not really into that kind of strategies and put them all together in this specific project. And then what we do with it is, once the project is over, we present it to the whole sector. And then we do workshops where we invite people to come. I can think about a project we did not long ago, precisely on recovery of water lines and buffer zones, where we then had a workshop with 50 plus producers there. And there was actually, I have to share with you, and there was this very interesting detail because there was a producer that was there, and this had not been planned. That was all very, very keen on investing on regen, and he had invested a lot of money. And so I asked him throughout the session if you could share with everybody how much had he spent in his buffer zones, hedgerows, cover crops, whatever. And he said, "I'm not going to tell you, but it was a lot of money. It was a lot of money. But what I can tell you is that because my grape was WASP certified, when I sold my grape to, because it's a grape producer, when I sold my grape to my WASP certified viticulture vintner, winemaker, the added value that he puts on my grape paid my investment in regen. So,
Amazing.
that's it's a kind of the full cycle, right?
So are you seeing that you're making, obviously that's a tangible difference that WASP is making from a kind of financial perspective
Mm.
linked to sustainability, which is amazing. So proving the value of sustainable certifications. But have you also got any examples where you've been able to demonstrate that you're actually helping your growers become more resilient in the face of climate change?
Well, what we hear from producers is indeed that many of them, and look, Portugal just witnessed, unfortunately, the future. The future was here this year, which was intensity, durability, and frequency. We had one heat wave that lasted 2 weeks, okay, with temperatures, which was in late July, early August. We had two heat waves in between July and August, okay, one really after the other with like 5 days in between, and then the second one was 10 days. It was almost 2 weeks of temperatures on the average of 43 degrees and tropical nights of 26 to 28 degrees, which is what the data or the algorithms say it's going to happen in 2050. Okay. So it's now happening. And what we understand is not all, obviously, because not all producers have the same velocity of adherence, the same velocity on implementation, and the same capacity, ultimately. But what we witness is that producers, there are more resilient, so that have been investing in cover crops for the last 5 to 10 years, that have investing in, ecosystem recovery and natural-based solutions. And I've been talking with a lot of them in the last couple of weeks. They have not only not seen yield losses, but they also see yield increases. Whereas what you're seeing, I mean, it's been cross-sectional around the country that there's going to be a break of probably between 15 to 30% in yield this year, precisely because of the weather conditions. And what I'm seeing, but then there's a paradoxical thing here, which is you also seem to see this more on the level of the smaller producers or those producers that are not really into the volume, but rather the quality. So if you're looking at producers that produce up to 7 tons per hectare, they will say, I'm good. I'm actually with 8.5 tons, 9 tons. But if you go see a producer that makes 20 tons, he'll tell you, wow, I lost 5 tons. Okay.
Okay.
So
So do you think therefore that's partly about the group of producers that you've got, and as part of that certification, everyone gradually working a little bit more in balance with nature, perhaps, and
I
finding
would
nature's natural balance?
Well, I would say so, although I have to say that in our case, we don't have our system is not fundamentalist. It's not orthodox, rather, in the sense that we only defend one line, meaning you can certify with us without being regen, and you can certify with us being regen. We give it enough space and flexibility to understand that there's more than one way to go. Obviously, there are ways that we would prefer, but while we, as the managers of the process, to say to a company, look, this is how you need to do it, and this is how you need to then
Do
indirectly
you have
manage your business.
do you have minimum standards in
Oh
your
yeah, definitely,
certification? Yeah,
definitely,
exactly.
definitely, definitely.
So, I mean, that's, I think, one of the things that makes WASP stand out for me is the fact that it has this, it's any certification scheme, there's this tightrope between kind of pragmatism and getting more people involved and idealism and keeping high
Yeah,
standards. And
for
I
sure.
think WASP is demonstrating this lovely space in the middle where you can have a bit of both. You've got really great engagement and high standards. How have you found bringing producers into that, where you're trying to get producers who are maybe early on that sustainability journey, but bringing them into accepting that level of data collection and that height of standard?
Well, and ultimately, and I'm actually sad to have to say it, but it's all about the money in the end. And so, because if you cannot secure your yield, you won't produce your money. If you don't get your product to supply pressure to the level that it's demanded somewhere downstream, you won't get your money either. And so the way we set this up, and I was very much, and I still am, focused and concentrated on the supply chain. So making sure that the wine that's in the bottle, it's the wine that we certified sustainable, because it may not happen. Okay, so you need to make sure that it is. And so for that, we created all of these, you know, intricate networks that need to be proven by the producers. And one of the things is related with the supply chain of the grape, for instance. And so they are forced to have their suppliers of grape at the level of eligibility to certify. But most of these guys are older men that have not the sensitivity or the sensibility, or don't give a damn. And so what these guys go there and say, look, I really need this, and I'll pay you 10% more on the grape. So please reduce your herbicides, reduce your pesticides, put your cover crops up, put some bed shelters around, attract some birds of prey. Don't, put some nice hedgerows on the side, recover your water lines. And funnily enough, I was last week with the producer, like this man I didn't know. So he's a supplier of a cooperative that's certified with us. And we had a TV show there. And the TV show guys were interviewing him. Bear in mind, this is a simple man, an entrepreneur, yes, but it's still a simple man, not used to the limelight, not used to the television. And in some point, the interviewer asked him, "So, but does this really work? Like, do you actually get a profit from this? Get a benefit from this?" And he said this beautiful sentence where he said, "Yeah, I save and I profit." Because I save in the soil, because I don't put so many herbicides, I don't put so many pesticides, I'm reducing all of this. But then I profit because they pay me 10% more on my grape, because I reached the levels they wanted me to reach. So, but then this guy will tell his mates. And then other guys will go, so how did these guys manage to do this and that? Ah, because they pay more on the grape. Oh, but people are doing that. Yeah, the people are doing that. Because you're also getting advantage in the markets, right? Some markets are giving you tender specific for you. So it then there's this trickle down effect on lots of different perspectives that are extremely interesting. And for me, the most important part, honestly, is that, I look at the viticulture as the fisherman. It's the guy that's there under the sun, under the rain, with the pests, with the diseases, and doesn't get to go to the fancy restaurant or the fancy wine fair to sell the wine at 500 euros or 100 euros or whatever. So if we can also increase this guy's input, more money on the pocket of the guy that's at the forefront of the problem, I think that's when you reach the full, the full Monty of the sustainability spectre in the whole industry, where you literally go from production to consumption, and everybody benefits directly and indirectly in some different way, right?
That's absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. I think what we've done in this conversation is created a fantastic little teaser for our session on the value of certification, which we're going to talk about in the morning of the 21st of October at Sustainability and Drinks. I've learned a lot about WASP today. And I think for me, it's that articulation of how we move through the benefit to the planet whilst also the benefit to the producer. Because if we can't benefit the producer, then the planet doesn't get the focus either. So that's amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I've now got endless additional questions to ask you on the panel at Sustainability and Drinks, but I very much look forward to speaking again then. And if anyone has any further questions, I'm sure they do, please feel free to send them over potentially, and we'll have a discussion on the 21st of October at Sustainability in Drinks.
I'll see
Thank
you
you,
there.
João.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.